Unless it's just early morning. Well, I'm glad I don't have one of them ticking things on my wrist like a handcuff. People pay too much attention to them. Oh, I see you rushing around looking at your wrist. And I also know you sometimes do it just to avoid looking at me. Well, anyways, if it is morning, it's my birthday. My 73rd. And when you come this far, you do a lot of looking back. That's what I've been doing. And there's one thing I can say right here, that I don't regret a thing I've done. No, sir. Now, that probably sounds dumb, with me living on the streets, sleeping on subway grates, staring at you when you walk by jingling the change in your pockets. But I don't beg. I have my dignity. But I only take what you all don't want anymore. You know, I used to save all the bunches of papers I found, thinking they was important since this is Washington, D.C. and all. But I quit during that scandal a few years back when I found out they cut up and burn all the important Waste. Anyways, living here in the Capitol, I get to see so much. A few years back, the president's long black car came zooming down my street on the day he got shot by that crazy kid. Now, which one was that? Nixon. No. Well, I haven't kept track of him much since Kennedy. He was the last real president, you know. I even quit going to the inaugurations. They wouldn't let me in. Just have to watch them on the stacks of TV sets in the department store windows. Oh, yeah. And I saw that big jet plane go down in the Potomac a few winters back. Well, I didn't actually see it to hit the bridge, but I was only a few blocks away over on 6th Street by the parking garages. Oh, I remember that day. Foggy and cold, real cold. I was sitting on a grate, subway grate, you know, saving a place while Willie was up at the Mission getting us some supper. Well, Willie, it was this, Willis Jackson was his name. A wrinkled up old colored man I'd met a few months before. He was a little bit crazy, but, well, then most everyone out here's got a few bats in their chimney. But he knew the city. Showed me the best places to find things, places to sleep where you wouldn't get beat up or arrested. Well, on that day, I was sitting on the subway grate waiting for Willie, and I was feeling that warm air flowing up my dress, sitting with my legs crossed so the air could come up through the holes and warm my face. And all of a sudden I heard this big roaring commotion up the street by the Mission. Oh, I got awful scared. Well, I didn't know it was a plane crash then. I thought something happened at the Mission, like a bus hitting the building or one of them terrorist bombs going off. Well, I wanted to rush right up and see what it was. But, well, it was dusk then. And, oh, the winter light was making the snow and everything else white, glow bluish in the half dark. It was already freezing and getting colder, and I knew if I left that grate during rush hour, well, we'd lose our spot. And I knew if we didn't get a grade that night, we'd be goners. So I stayed there a while, upset, but warm, till the sirens started up. Oh, first over on the other side of the river, far away, and coming closer. And a little while later, more sirens yelling, this time from nearby, coming my way until they turned onto my street a block away and went screaming by. Ambulances, fire trucks, police cars, all of them trying to drive fast on them icy streets and sliding around corners sideways. Oh, then I really got scared. I was sure it was the mission that something awful had happened. Well, then I heard this helicopter flying overhead, and I remembered the airport nearby. And then I thought, well, maybe a plane had hit the mission. But then I figured, well, if it was the mission, then Willie was probably either dead and I couldn't do anything, or he was hurt bad enough they'd take him to some nice warm hospital where I could sit by him all night. It's crazy what you think when you're scared half out of your wits. So I got up, feeling the cold day rush up around my body when I stepped off of the grate. And I packed all of our things into my girl here, making sure to put the emergency stuff on top. Like that quilt Willie got from the mission the Christmas before, and the first aid kit that I found in the park over in Pennsylvania after that Red Cross function. I even took that bottle that Willie kept hid, despite knowing how I felt about booze and all. Well, he never even knew that I knew his hiding place in that loose cinder block until that day I went huffing up to the mission, puffing my breath out in front of me in little clouds, and there was Willie out in front of the mission building, both of them in one piece I could see. He's dancing around in the cold without a coat on. Only one out there, save for that new young priest from Cleveland, the one that never wore a collar and eventually got sent somewhere else. Well, he was trying to get a coat on my Willie, but the old boy just kept dancing around. That priest never did know how to handle my Willie. Well, I thought it odd then that there was just the two of them out there. I mean, usually the mission's crowded about that time, especially in the winter. Well, by the time I finally got up to the building, even the priest had given up and had run off down the street to the river. And there was only Willie, his eyes big as hen's eggs, waving his arms and pointing his gray bare finger down the street after where the priest had gone. "He come back, Elizabeth," he was yelling. "He come back. Jesus Christ, come back," just like he said in Revelations. Well, he sounded just like he must have when he was a Baptist preacher somewhere down south. I saw him like a big silver bird come down on the bridge. Well, now that's when I knew it must have been a plane crash. Willie, he just kept dancing around and singing some old church song about down by the riverside. Well, I was only getting cold. So I parked my girl against the building with her wheels pointing to the wall so she wouldn't roll back down the hill. That's something I learned the hard way. I had to chase after her 3 blocks one time. Anyways, where was I? Oh, yeah, the mission. So I picked up this coat that the priest had dropped, and I fought to get it around Willie while he's trying to convince me that it's Judgment Day. He was raving about how he's ready for heaven, just waiting for Jesus to come and get him. Well, he explained how all the other old boys and ladies from the mission had gone down to the river. But Willie said he didn't want to make Jesus mad by rushing down there all self-righteous like and assuming he was fit for heaven. Told me that Jesus would come by when he wanted to and choose for himself who would go with him and who wouldn't. And then he muttered some Bible verse about them that wait on the Lord. Well, I just kept nodding and fought to get that coat around Willie so he wouldn't catch his death of cold. I even got him to put on a pair of gloves that I'd found earlier in the day by telling him we were getting dressed up for Jesus. You see, people like Willie, you gotta humor them a little and still respect what they believe. or what they think they believe. Well, anyway, when I finally got him calmed down, he smiled and told me how glad he was that I'd be there to see him off in case Jesus didn't find me fit to go along. Now that's when I got a little mad. I mean, here I pushed this heavy girl 3 blocks up that hill, worrying that he'd been maimed or killed, and he was telling me I may not be fit for heaven. But I bit my lip and held my temper, something I got from my mother's side. And I tried to convince him to go into the mission and get some supper, but he just stood there. I tried to tell him it was only a plane crash, but he acted deaf. So then I reasoned with him. I said, well, now, if Jesus being the Son of God and all, you know, he'll know that Willis Carver Jackson's just inside the mission getting himself a good meal before the trip. But if Willis stayed outside and caught pneumonia, well, then God might not let Jesus bring him into heaven and spread them germs around to all the angels and souls. Willie listened to that. So I guided him through the doors and into the mission. And I parked my girl out behind the dumpster out back and went in to join him for some supper. Well, by that time, some of the folks were coming back from the river, talking all about the commotion. And the young priest in the turtleneck sweater, he got up in front and told us all about the plane crash. Well, I think Willie finally believed it then, because I saw tears in his eyes. And then the priest, he had us all kneel down and say the Lord's Prayer together. Well, Willie knelt too, but he talked to God like he was some old buddy of his. I mean, spoke to the Almighty in normal, everyday words, and louder than the rest of us, like him and God were the only ones in the mission. Oh, I didn't understand things well then. At the time, I sure was embarrassed. Well, by the time we got back to them subway grates, all of them were taken just as I feared. No room even if somebody had offered. So Willie and I, we wandered over to that park on Pennsylvania Avenue, found us a place in the bushes near a lamppost where I figured we'd be safe from muggers. Oh, we got everything out we could cover us up with, and we huddled together to wait for morning. Well, of course, Willie, he fell asleep right away, snoring loud as usual, but I couldn't sleep. No, it wasn't because of the snoring. That always let me know Willie was alive. It's because I had this awful feeling that we weren't going to make it if I fell asleep in the cold. But if I stayed awake and made sure Willie kept breathing, we could make it. Well, you know, looking back, I know now that it was that jet plane crash had death worrying me. We'd been through colder nights. Oh, but at the time, I felt sure that if I dozed off, we were doomed. But I did it. Kept my eyes open while the sky rolled over us. The moon up there somewhere shining behind the clouds, but shining all night, I knew. Yeah, I sang some nursery rhymes at first to keep my mind alert. Then I sang the only songs I could remember from Catholic school, Christmas carols like Away in the Manger, from the Christmas programs we used to put on. Sang them over and over again till they didn't even seem like songs anymore. And then I tried to remember some of them hymns that Willie sang from his days as a preacher. There was this one, I could only remember one line from, just a closer walk with thee, just a closer walk with thee. Well, I just sang that one line over and over to the whole song. And I did that again and again until the first hint of sun on the horizon. Well, a few times during the night, Willie stopped snoring, and I put my ear to his mouth. breath I could hear, going in and out of them, warm and alive. Well, I prayed a little thank you that morning. It was the first time I tried to talk to God in my own words instead of saying some prayer I learned in Catholic school. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I do remember feeling like He heard me. It was my first real feeling of God. First time since I was a girl that I really believed someone was listening. I didn't know it would get better later. Yes, Willie and I made it through that night. Jesus didn't decide to take him from me till a year later, just after Thanksgiving. We'd gotten separated after supper at the mission. Willie told me to save a place on the subway grates. He was going down to buy me a Christmas present. But he probably did have the money. People are more generous around the holidays. But at the time, well, I thought he was joking. And that was stupid of me. See, Willie never joked. Well, that's what made him so pure, even when he acted nuts. Well, I stayed on the grate, being rude to people to save a spot open for Willie. And I felt like it was really getting dark and late. You see, you can't tell time by the sky in winter very well, only by the traffic getting less busy. And I feared that Willie had been jumped by some hoodlums downtown. Oh, it's such a bad place at night. So I packed everything into my girl, and I headed for downtown. I went to all the places where I thought he could be. I went through the parks, past the shopping centers, closed by that late. I checked the little cardboard shanty where Grace and Eddie lived. Now, this was before the trash boys were ordered to tear them down. Well, Grace even wanted me to stay overnight and look for Willie in the morning, but I said, no, I couldn't sleep without knowing where Willie was. Why, he might be hurt and needing help somewhere. So I kept on, pushing down the same old streets, sliding around the same slippery corners, even tripping over the same uneven slabs of the sidewalk. Watched that same puff after puff of breath in front of me blow back in my face. Oh, I was in a daze. Till I saw the Bank of America clock blinking 21 degrees, 6:07. So I decided to head back to the subway grates over by the mission. Well, the trip back seemed shorter, with it getting light all around. The gray sky seemed to burn away and shining bright pink and blue, casting my long, sharp shadow ahead of me. I know I prayed all night that night, too, starting out with Hail Marys and Our Fathers, and soon mumbling like I was talking to myself. The night was like a dream. The morning was like waking up, so bright in the sunlight. Well, I hardly noticed my breath in front of me, blowing in my face, and didn't feel as cold neither. I felt hopeful. I'd made it. And I figured Willie just missed me and had gone over to the subway grates to get a night's sleep. Well, when I turned the corner, I squinted to see if any of the old boys on the grates looked like my Willie. Well, it seemed odd there were so few people on the grates. Being such a cold night, that seemed wrong. But at first, I guessed that everybody had already risen for the day. But then I noticed something missing. Them familiar heat trails above the rows of grates that usually ripple the air like ghosts. Well, I hurried up even faster. I slipped a few times and fell down and got right back up again. And when I crossed the street, well, I recognized one of the people as Willie. Though he was covered with a thin layer of frost, shining in the sunlight. I looked at the others, and they were all covered icy too. It looked like the little pewter figures I'd collected as a child. I set my girl against the curb so she wouldn't roll. And then I walked over to Willie. And I knelt down beside him. He was curled in a ball with his hands tucked under his armpits. There was a frost on his face that made his scruffy beard sparkle. And his skin wasn't black anymore. It was silver. Well, he must have missed me on the way back home. He must have talked someone out of a place on the grades. He was good at that, so sincere you couldn't say no. He must have fell asleep snoring loud. Well, later I found out that sometime during the night, the subway stop had a power failure and stopped sending heat up through the grates. The lighter sleepers woke up, of course, but a few, like my Willie, slept sound. I made the sign of the cross and muttered something from my childhood. And then I stood up, and I got my girl, and I walked slow up that street to the mission to tell the priest. Different one, older, always wore the uniform. I didn't stay around until the police came, but someone told me later that they had to use crowbars to get him off the grates. Well, now that's not the end of my story, but it's the place up to where most people believe me. Well, now, I know how this is going to sound. And I've seen that same look on everyone's face. Humor the old gal and pretend to believe. But, a few nights later, while they were still guarding them grates like they was made of gold, and I had to sleep in the park on Pennsylvania, Jesus came and talked to me. Now, I know what you're thinking already, that either this lady's as crazy as Willie or she just fell asleep and dreamed the whole thing. Well, I'm sure it was no dream, and I'm not crazy. But as I huddled there in the same bushes where Willie and I had slept the year before after the plane crash, I heard a voice, a young man's voice, say, "Lizzie." Now, I know he said that because that's what my mama used to call me, and he wanted to put me at ease. He said, "Lizzie, I want to talk to you." Now, I didn't know yet that it was Jesus. And I've been on the streets long enough to know you just don't come running out when you hear somebody call your name. But the third time he said it, "Lizzie," well, I got this warm feeling inside, just like when I heard Willie breathing that night after the plane crash and knew we'd made it. So I stepped out of the bushes and into the light of the lamppost. And there was Jesus, just like I always imagined him, in a long white robe. Well, he was sitting on the park bench, and his breath was making little clouds just like mine. "Aren't you cold?" I asked. He laughed real quiet and said, "No." "Why are you here?" Well, he answered in the calmest voice I ever heard. He said, "No, Lizzie, I haven't come to take you. I just want you to know that Willis is doing fine." Now, that made me feel real good. But I wanted to hear him say more, so I walked around the bench, and I sat down next to him. Oh, not too close so as to be rude, about a foot or two away. Now, everybody asked me, but I couldn't see his face, the way the lamp lit him from behind, but I could see the outline of his beard, and on his shoulders, his hair shining, beautiful. "Willie's in heaven, huh?" I tried to make it sound like I was agreeing with the Lord. I always knew Willie'd make it to a better place. "Yes, Lizzie," said Jesus. Now, I waited a moment, and then I decided you only get this chance once, so I asked him, "Lord, meaning no disrespect, but why did you take him?" And Jesus answered, "Because he was ready. He wanted to go. He didn't really want to leave you, but it was the right time." Well, somehow I felt that Jesus was right. And then I just blurted out, "Well, what about all the others that died around him?" And Jesus said, "I couldn't help that." "Well, what do you mean you couldn't help that?" Oh, it was out of my mouth before I remembered I was talking to him. "Some people go when they're ready. I can feel that," he said. "Others go by accidents, even though they may not be ready." And then I had one last question to ask. "Jesus, am I ready?" "I know the answer to that," he said, "but so do you." And then he stood up and said, "Willis is doing fine, don't worry." And he stood a moment under the lamppost. And I said I wouldn't worry, and I stood there not knowing whether to bow or curtsy or what. They don't teach you nothing in Catholic school about how to talk to the Lord in the flesh. So finally I just said, "Thank you. You're welcome, Lizzie. Goodbye and take care." And he raised his hand. Well, now, I couldn't see any nail mark, but I'm sure it was there. And then, after a moment, he turned and stepped off into the darkness. "Goodbye, Jesus." I said it after he disappeared, but I'm sure he heard me. Well, you're not going to read about that in a newspaper or see it on your TV set. I wouldn't even try to tell them no, they just think I was some crazy old woman. But it's been a few years, and I've told a couple of people, and I've seen the look on some of their faces. And I used to worry that Jesus wanted me to do something, though he didn't say anything when he was here. I even wondered if maybe it was my mission to find other people like Willie. But now, on my birthday, well, I know I don't have much time left. And I wouldn't want to have to leave someone behind. I know now that these last days are for on my own. And that's okay. Singing them old tunes of Willie's. feeling ready.